I'm going to take this opportunity to call this meeting to order now that we have quorum and the cameras are on. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Housing Policy and Development Committee. I'm Cam Gordon, chair of the committee, and I'm joined today by council members Kevin Reich, Jeremy Schrader, Lisa Bender, and Lisa Goodman, as well as Jeremiah Ellison, the vice chair of the committee. We have a number of items before us today, including some discussion items, a public hearing on 5 different land sales, and consent items. What I'm going to do is take the consent items first. Any committee member who'd like to pull one off for questioning or comments, feel free to do so. The first consent item, which is number 6 on our agenda, is authorizing staff to continue with analysis of Summit House condominium project to determine if housing improvement area financing assistance is appropriate. The 7th item, which is also on consent, is authorizing staff to continue analysis of the Northside Art Space lofts to determine if the tax increment financing assistance is appropriate and justifiable. The 8th item, also on consent, is a passage of a resolution authorizing the carry forward of $52,672,843 of year 2018 tax-exempt housing revenue bonds for multifamily housing program, and that would be authorizing it to be moved forward so we could use it in the future. And the final consent item, number 9 on the agenda, is referring to CPED and city coordinator staff the issue of the Minneapolis garden lease program for recommended improvements and a report back to our committee in the first quarter of 2019. If anyone, I see no one wishing to pull anything off, then I will move the consent item forward for approval. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Those motions are approved. Then we'll come back to the beginning of our agenda, which is the land sales. I think we're going to take the small side yard land sale first, and then we'll take the other ones, which are all land sales to Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation together. And I believe we'll have Ms. Coleman to present on this.
I am presenting on behalf of Erica Coleman, who's actually out today. I'm Roxanne Young-Kimball. Chair Gordon and members of the committee, staff is recommending sale of 2208 James Avenue North as a side yard. Policies for the side yard program were established by the City Council on January 15th, 2016. Staff recommends sale to Assertive Minneapolis Properties 2 LLC for its appraised value of $1,200, subject to conditions. The property was acquired on May 16th, 2018 from Hennepin County tax forfeited land for $500. It is substandard in size at 3,390 square feet. It will be combined with the adjacent property at 2210 James Avenue North, which is approximately 3,330 square feet, for a combined parcel of approximately 6,721 square feet. Based on the side yard program criteria, including verification of the purchaser's property taxes, that they're currently current, and that the purchaser's property maintenance complies with building code and zoning ordinance, Assertive Minneapolis Properties 2 LLC is recommended as the purchaser. Notification was provided to the Jordan Area Community Council on September 6, 2018. I can take any questions at this time.
I don't see any questions. Thank you very much. And thanks for subbing for your colleague. Appreciate that. I will open the public hearing on this to see if anybody is here to speak to it. Anyone like to come up and make any comments about this land sale? Seeing none then. Oh, no? Yes? I guess not. I will close the public hearing then. Any discussion on this? Seeing none then. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries. Then we'll move on to the next land sale, and maybe we can hear about these all in a group. And I believe I have it correct that Mr. Ramadan is going to be presenting. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Gordon, members of the committee. We have the last 4 of the Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation land sales, and those would be 2206 James Avenue North, 2709 Humboldt Avenue North, 3519 Oliver Avenue North, and 3633 Oliver Avenue North. The sale is through the policies established for Minneapolis homes by the City Council on December 11, 2015 and February 10, 2017. And staff is recommending the sale of, again, these properties to Greater Metropolitan Housing Corporation, or GMIC, for their appraised values of $4,900, $3,100, $7,600, and $7,300, respectively, subject to conditions. The staff is continually marketing these properties to an email listserv of now over 2,400 recipients, and these were the only offers received for the properties. The purchaser has secured $4 million in new markets tax credits to invest in building, as we mentioned, a total of 10 single-family homes. To make these homes more affordable, $4 million of this $4 million represents approximately $800,000 in development gap assistance for an average write-down of $70,000 per project. There is no direct assistance from the city for these projects. Notification was provided to the Untitled Community Council and the Fowler neighborhood on August 6, 2008. On 11/21/18, that is November 21st, 2018, the Fowler Neighborhood Association wrote email to Eden Spencer at GMIC, and I'll read the following. It says, "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us last night. Fowler Neighborhood Association is committed to having sustainable, affordable housing in our area. We're excited that you have these 6 projects in the neighborhood, and we'll work with you however we can to make them as affordable, sustainable, and as efficient as possible. Please use my email as a direct line to the Fowler Neighborhood Board, Beryl Ann Burton, Fowler Neighborhood Association." Unfortunately, Eden Spencer from GMIC could not be here today because of a scheduling conflict. I'm here to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions, so I think I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there anybody here who would like to speak on the land sales for items 2, 3, 4, or 5 as outlined? Step up and introduce yourself. Your name and your address if you're comfortable.
Yep. I'm Kitty Stratton, 35. I'm just going to say the 3500 block of DuPont Avenue North, and I'm part of the Fall Neighborhood Housing Committee. We did meet. I'm going to start at the beginning because last time I didn't know I was going to speak. But after I heard that the affordable houses were going to be $220 to $250, I was kind of thrown off guard because I don't know how that's affordable in North Minneapolis, even with all the programs to homeowners. So, for other people in Minneapolis, those homes could be affordable, and that's what's happening. So I want to start out by addressing the things that are with the affordable homes that are going to be built in North Minneapolis. Now, with these 2 additional properties in the Falwell neighborhood, there's going to be 8 houses within Falwell neighborhood. It's going to have an impact. So I want to address true affordability, super energy efficient and resiliency, sustainable and durable with low maintenance costs, and low or no energy costs in the future. I have a packet for you guys here that I put together since I just found out they were buying more houses, which we met with GMIC. They came to our housing meeting last Tuesday, and we met with them, and they didn't mention that they were buying 2 more properties. We just talked to them about the 6 that they were. I was a little miffed that they hadn't mentioned that there were 2 more on the agenda, which I thought was kind of disingenuous. So as you can see in this packet, right now the current home sales of in Falwell is $150,000. In McKinley, it's $170,000 in average sale price. And in the Cleveland neighborhood, it's about $157,000. These houses are going to be selling for 150% more than the average price of houses currently for sale in those neighborhoods. The sales price will facilitate faster gentrification in the neighborhood, especially in Falwell, where with these 2 lots, there'll be 8 new homes by June that are listing above the current average of $150,000. This is a bigger discussion than we can do here, but I think we all know the impact of what happens when a house sells for a high dollar amount. The next house that's listed within the comparable area is listed for more than it should be. I have an example. We paid $180,000 for a house that was appraised at $145,000 because we knew it was an important teaching tool for energy efficiency. This $180,000 sales price was used to list the next renovated house down the street, which was listed then for $219,000. It didn't sell for that, but they listed it for that. Then a year later, the small dilapidated house next to us that was sold for $30,000, the flippers put $40,000 in it and sold it for $170,000 based on the comparable of our house. So you can see what's happening. This is part of the gentrification route where come in, build new houses, they sell for too high of a price to people that are probably not within the neighborhood. And then now our house is currently listed on Zillow for being worth $221,000, which we never, ever, ever thought we'd see in our lifetime. We've been there 3 years. And now this has caused an increase in property tax. As you know, our property tax is going up next year 23%. So, since the last meeting, I told you we got together with Gimmick to discuss how to build a super simple, energy-efficient house. Myself and a couple other people know how to do this. We have the data. We also have supportive information on the simplicity of doing this type of build. It needs, at the minimum, at least 2 things to start: a lot more insulation and super great windows. For windows, the only thing that needs to be done extra is to buy better windows, and with the lowest U factors. The installation is the same, so there's no additional labor charges, and some of the best ones are made in Milwaukee. The insulated walls are also a simple thing and adds little to the construction documentation since this build's already been approved by the city twice. The exterior wall is the same type of wall being built currently. Then a blanket of insulation is laid in the center and another wall identical to the one in the exterior is built in the interior. That's it. I designed it to be simple. It only uses 3 products for all 3 walls. This was used to reduce the over amount of waste also. I have some numbers in here that I've run on my own to show you that the upcharge is very little, and I'll get to that in a minute. This house can be even more healthy and fire resistant, adding additional $1,500 using mineral wool insulation rather than fiberglass. I'm almost done.
All right. People are getting anxious.
Yeah, I know. Mineral wool doesn't mold, isn't mildew, it doesn't slump, and it takes 3,000 degrees for it to burn. I've done a cost analysis on the upgrades, which should only cost about $8 a square foot, around $15,000 for a house that's selling for $250,000, and this can be recuperated in 8 to 10 years without solar panels. So this new house type can address wealth building, which is a big issue. If they build these houses to code, like currently, the homeowners would be buying in and living in a house that's already outdated as far as energy efficiency and a homeowner's current and future energy needs. The house will end up being a long-term negative on any family over time, not only with maintenance issues, but with energy costs that are not capped or under control. Doing a super energy efficient house has a high resale value, as they also qualify for an energy efficient mortgage, which I have information on in this packet.
Maybe you could leave some of that information for us? Maybe you could leave that information for us.
This is for you.
And we'll certainly take that under consideration. Are you almost done?
Yeah, please.
You can leave the whole letter, too, if you want.
Yeah, I'm going to. So the whole conversation around energy and climate change has been going on for a long, long time, and there's no movement. We have a really small time to react. And if you guys don't start taking the leadership position in this, it really doesn't matter if they build those houses or not, because in 10 to 12 years it's going to be a kind of a moot point, as indicated by the current climate reports that are released. So I'm going to leave this for you. I have what I did is I put together at the very back some information that you can go and find out for yourself. I also left the Rocky Mountain Institute report that just came out this month on the overall value of doing energy efficiency and the costs across the country.
Well, hopefully you gave that to Gimmick representatives as well, and you can leave it with the clerk if you want us to get it.
Well, the Gimmick people have it. They're just
okay,
not.
Good.
They're
Excellent.
just not. What would I call it? They're just being resistant.
Okay. Well, let's see if anybody else wants to come up and speak. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this matter? Seeing no one then, I'll thank you for your testimony, and I will close the public hearing. And I'm comfortable moving the land sales forward for recommendation. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, then all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. We will move forward, and I believe that is the last of the 10 Gimmick homes. Is that right, Mr. Ramadan? Yeah, okay. So let's move on to item 10. And actually, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss item 10 and 11 at the same time. One, they both have to do with our inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning policy. One concerns a little bit more than that. With our unified housing policy, there are some additional amendments, but the main amendments are about that issue. And then there's also the inclusionary zoning policy framework. So welcome, Ms. Brennan.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Andrea Brennan, Director of Housing Policy and Development in Department of Community Planning and Economic Development. So the inclusionary housing policy proposed actions and timelines are listed here. They are all intended to sort of culminate at the December 7th City Council meeting, where the council is scheduled to consider adoption of the Minneapolis 2040 Comprehensive Plan. This was very intentional to ensure that the framework for the inclusionary housing policy is approved alongside the Minneapolis 2040 Comp Plan to support the affordable housing goals of that plan. Listed here are the December 7th items: adoption of the Minneapolis 2040 Comp Plan, the framework for a permanent inclusionary housing policy, approve of an interim inclusionary zoning ordinance that would be in effect January 1, adopt unified housing policy amendments to support and list the affordability requirements of the policies, and approve a staff direction to return with financing program for an interim IZ ordinance. So that's a lot. That's all headed for December 7th. But what is before you today are 3 of those items. So the framework for a comprehensive inclusionary housing policy, the unified housing policy amendments, and staff direction to return back with a financing program to support the interim IZ policy. Tomorrow at the Zoning and Planning Committee, the Zoning and Planning Committee will consider the actual interim inclusionary zoning ordinance. So generally, the inclusionary housing policy proposals were developed based on recommendations made by Grounded Solutions Network, based on financial feasibility analysis, policy research regarding national best practices, input from the development community, as well as input from affordable housing advocates and experts. This work was also supported by a pretty broad city staff team from Community Planning, Economic Development, Housing Development Services, and Long-Range Planning staff, the City Attorney's Office, and Finance and Property Services. The recommendations that are included in the policies before you today and tomorrow were presented at the HPD committee, at this committee, on August 22nd. And the City Council approved 3 staff directions at that time to return back with this framework for an inclusionary housing policy, an interim inclusionary zoning ordinance, and unified housing policy changes. So first, I'll start with the actual inclusionary housing policy framework. Again, in the Minneapolis 2040 plan, the proposal is to allow for greater residential and mixed-use building density and capacity. So the inclusionary housing policy is intended to support the affordable housing goals of the Minneapolis 2040 plan and promote mixed-income development. The framework is for a policy that would apply citywide to any project seeking site plan approval. And it would also be subject to a certain threshold size, which is yet to be determined. The affordability requirements recommended are to have 2 different options. One, where 10% of units, and this is for rental projects, 10% of units would be affordable to households with an income at or below 60% of the area median income, or 20% of the units affordable to households with an income at or below 50% of median income. And the deeper affordability target at 50% AMI would make projects eligible for city financial assistance. The ownership projects, affordability requirements of those would still need to be determined and recommended based on further analysis. The affordability period would be 20 years for projects that do not receive any city financial assistance, and 30 years if city financial assistance is provided. And that is our understanding the longest period of affordability allowed under state statutes for those two different categories. And finally, the inclusionary housing policy framework will be recommended as a feasible policy and recommended by a third-party consultant. So the action before you today on the inclusionary housing policy framework is to direct staff to develop a comprehensive inclusionary housing policy for adoption in 2019. And a list of the items that will need to be considered, analyzed, and brought forward in a form of a recommendation are included in your packets. Any questions on the framework before I move on to the housing policy changes?
I just wanted to make clear when we talk about the requirement is 10%. At 60%, that requirement is that it's at least 10% at 60% and at least 20% at 50%. People can exceed those.
Yes.
And it's at least 20 years or at least 30 years. People can also exceed those. So,
correct.
Okay.
So now I'll move on to proposed changes to the unified housing policy. The housing policy supports the interim inclusionary zoning ordinance. The interim inclusionary zoning ordinance, as I said before, will be considered by the Zoning and Planning Committee tomorrow. The ordinance only applies to projects that are seeking substantial additional development capacity of 60% or more. And this is proposed to be in effect January 1 and will be in effect then until it is replaced by a permanent inclusionary zoning policy. The affordable requirements that we're proposing for the interim inclusionary zoning ordinance are the same that we're recommending for the permanent. So for rental projects, 10% of the units, at least 10% of the units would be affordable to households at or below 60% of the AMI. Or at least 20% of the units would be affordable to households with incomes at or below 50% of the area median income, and those projects would be eligible to apply for financial assistance. Again, the period of affordability, same as recommended for the framework, 20 years of affordability at least if there is no subsidy provided, and 30 years with subsidy. For the interim inclusionary zoning ordinance, we are recommending that ownership projects and student housing projects be exempt. The rationale for that is that with an effective date of January 1, staff doesn't have a strong recommendation for how to incorporate those specific projects. So we are requesting additional time to do analysis and determine and recommend feasible affordability requirements for both of these two categories.
I have a question on this. I think we're going to need a very specific and airtight definition of what student housing is, or people may just come in and say, oh, no, it's student housing. So how do we make sure to limit that?
Chair Gordon, we right now are proposing that we will be developing a set of procedures for the implementation of the interim inclusionary zoning ordinance, and so we would define student housing in that procedures document.
Okay, so then I'll just share that I think it's going to be really important that we define it, and we define it narrowly, and we define it well. If it's a dormitory built by a university, that would make total sense.
Right.
But in the second ward, the first ward, the third ward, there's lots of apartment buildings that are put in and built and constructed, and everybody knows the market is students, and they talk about it as student housing. But of course, it's not restricted only to students. They can't do that. So I just want us to be careful with that exemption, because it could create a pretty large carve out for a lot of people if we leave it too big. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thanks.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And perhaps we can all follow up before tomorrow's Z&P meeting just to see if we might add some more specificity to the language that's coming tomorrow in the ordinance piece.
Okay. Good idea.
Great.
Thank you.
There are some other changes that are recommended to the Unified Housing Policy that really are just intended to be consistent with the goals and policies and the language of the Minneapolis 2040 plan. The policy currently in place really reflects the language of our existing comp plan. So we wanted to make sure that there was consistency there. And then adding new statements related to city goals around anti-displacement of existing residents, particularly low-income tenants and low-income residents, and as well as adding language in support of tenant and homeowner supports. The proposed amendments were released for public comment on October 10th. We received several comments which are included in your packets. As I said, the interim IZ ordinance is proposed to be in effect January 1. And there is more work that is needed on the financial assistance option of the policy. So in addition to requesting approval of these amendments, we are asking for staff direction to return to this committee in March with proposed interim inclusionary zoning tax increment financing policy and program to support a feasible inclusionary housing policy that supports continued production of housing in the city. A couple of things to note here. The public purpose of an inclusionary zoning ordinance is to add affordability in what would otherwise be a 100% market rate development. In some cases, the financial assistance may be necessary for feasibility, and we want to be able to evaluate and bring back recommendations and information about the potential financial and resource implications of this, and also note that effective inclusionary zoning policies around the country, and there are many of them, the effective policies are simple, they provide clear rules for compliance, and they are administered on a reasonable timeline and at a reasonable cost. So we will be looking at our financial modeling for the financing option of the inclusionary zoning ordinance and come back with recommendations for that. So here are the proposed options in connection with the Unified Housing Policy amendments, to adopt the amendments and to direct staff to return with the financial policy that I just spoke about. So that's all I've prepared for a presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions right now, but maybe there'll be some in a minute. I just, before, or maybe as somebody's preparing a motion or wants to entertain one, I just want to note what a significant amount of work has got us to this point. I know it looks like it's a nice package, but this went back, stretches months and months of work and consultants to come in and help us craft this and study this and look at this. And I think it was pretty ambitious that we set our sights on getting something accomplished by the time we were approving the comp plan. But I just want to commend my colleagues, I think particularly Council Members Bender and Schrader, for helping to push this forward and get it organized and get the information that we need in to come forward. I also have to thank staff, and I also have to thank all the community folks out there who weighed in on this. I know that during the Grounded Solutions study process, there were focus groups and developers who met, and I know that there was lots of dialogue and pushing and pulling about where to go and how to land, and I know that we also heard a lot from advocates. We certainly had a great comments about modifying our unified housing policy. I think some of those were taken into consideration and some things were cleared up and where we've landed here. And I'm excited about pivoting, taking this next step, and then also being there in the morning for the other phase at the zoning committee. So congratulations, everybody, and it'll be interesting to see how the interim ordinance goes and what we end up with next year as well. Councilmember Schrader.
I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank the council president. I mean, you talked about being months, but it's been years of work, and just wanted to commend her vision for this. And we're not there yet, but excited to be this far in the process.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate very much the kind words. So I think I'll try to make the motions that staff described. I might need help after today's long day. So we have two staff directions. The first is to direct staff to develop a comprehensive inclusionary housing policy consistent with the framework, and that's what we have in front of us, and it has those 4 items. And then we also would be adopting item 10. So I would move adoption of item 10 and move that staff direction under item 11. And is there a second staff direction?
It's under 10 as well. So under
perfect.
10, we're adopting the amendments to our unified housing policy and also directing staff to return in, I think it was March,
Thank you.
with the policy about how to use tax increment financing and the program to support the affordable housing requirements. Thank you very much for making that motion. Well done. Would you like to speak to it?
Yes, thank you. I'll just speak briefly today because it's a very long day at City Hall. But I want to thank staff very much for all the work that went into this. It really has been a complex process that went across many departments in the city. And I just want to say a couple things here. Number one, I think there's many ways to support housing affordability in our city. And I think this inclusionary zoning ordinance will be one of many tools, assuming it passes tomorrow at ZNP and through the council. And so that's really, I think, the way that we've been looking at it is one of a whole host of tools that we are using as a city to support housing affordability. We are making it easier to develop over time. That happened in the city in the 90s, when downtown was upzoned, when we started reducing parking requirements. And so unlike other cities that are more restrictive, we've given away a lot of the incentives that cities use to promote affordability and market rate projects by making it easier to develop overall. And I think that's a good thing in our city. We need more housing. And so ordinance has been carefully crafted to not stop the needed supply of new housing in our city. So in this interim period, we'll get a chance to see how the policy is working as staff works to develop the TIF portion or the funding portion of the final ordinance. And I do want to say, I think we've been anticipating a potential downturn in our housing market, potentially less housing construction. So we will have to look in the short term at how our ordinance is working, but this is really intended to be a long-reaching policy that is a tool to promote affordability in every Minneapolis neighborhood. And we know our housing markets go through cycles. Had we had this policy in place during this last housing boom, we would have hundreds of affordable units in neighborhoods across the city, including hundreds in Ward 10. And it's hard to get these kind of publicly subsidized affordable housing projects in neighborhoods where the land costs are very high. And so we've really been missing out on this tool. And so I'm excited to be able to bring it forward now along with the comprehensive plan update.
Thank you. I don't see any other comments then or questions. So on the motion approving the recommendations for both 10 and 11, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Those motions carry. So thank you very much and congratulations. Those will go on to the council for consideration at the last meeting of the year. And now we're moving on to item number 12. And this is passage of a resolution establishing guiding principles in support of investments in public housing and the people who live there. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I would like to acknowledge that we have here with us today several folks from Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, MPHA, Greg Russ, their Executive Director, Tracy Scott, Deputy Executive Director, Lisa Griebel, their General Counsel, and Jeff Horowitz, their Communications Director. So thank you for joining us. The Minneapolis Public Housing Authority owns and operates approximately 6,000 public housing units in the city of Minneapolis, providing homes to more than 25,000 low-income residents in neighborhoods across the city. These homes are subject to an agreement between the MPHA and the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, pursuant to which federal funds are provided to support the operations, repair, and renovation of these homes. Unfortunately, for decades, the federal government has underfunded the operational and capital needs of public housing in Minneapolis and in cities and towns throughout the United States. MPHA is considering the use of various funding strategies to preserve the permanent affordability and quality of this critical housing resource in the city. The resolution before you proposes, it states the city's support for the permanent preservation and improvement of public housing and establishes guiding principles for the use and implementation of funding strategies to accomplish this goal. The emphasis on the guiding principles are to state the city's priority that this very critical resource remains a permanent asset for current and future residents, and that any process that involves funding streams to preserve public housing includes meaningful resident and community engagement and ensures that resident protections are in place. In addition to the resolution, staff are, the request here is for staff to be directed to negotiate terms for a memorandum of understanding with MPHA regarding principles for public housing financial conversion and report back to the City Council in the first quarter of 2019. And MPHA is here and would be happy to answer any questions as well.
That's wonderful. I also want to note that we've been joined by Councilmember Warsame, and the resolution is actually authored by Councilmember Warsame and Jenkins. I plan to move it forward on their behalf since they don't sit on the committee. And if somebody from Public Housing would like to come up and just share any of their thoughts about this, you're more than welcome to do so. Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple questions for Mr. Russ about, not about this, but a related housing issue. Could I ask him those questions after he speaks to this, since he's here today?
I guess so, if it doesn't take up too much time. Yeah.
Chair Gordon and members of the committee and Councilmember Warsame, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'll be brief. We're really very excited about the resolution and the opportunity to establish what we think is groundwork and framing document that would allow us to undertake steps necessary inside the federal rules to try and bring more income and opportunity for the preservation of our housing. I've talked to a number of you individually and on background about the requirements that HUD places on us and the options that we have under there, and we think that the resolution really both encourages and supports our efforts to test and see what we can get inside the federal framework that we can bring home here to our city. And the second thing we want to be mindful of is that we very much are interested in making sure that this is done with minimal relocation issues, that we define the relocation rights of each of the families, the right to return, which I've talked to many of you about, and how all that would be handled inside a relocation rights contract that would be made available each time we take on an opportunity to do a conversion. So both the resolution and our chance to work with city staff on coming to agreement around the MOU are welcome. So I wanted to say thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. And if you're willing to, I think Councilmember Goodman has some unrelated questions.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, in light of the fact that we're in the budget process, I'm just wondering if you can tell me about this program that's not really a program, that I don't see any written information about, called Stable Homes, Stable Schools. I kind of see it as a diversion of $9 million from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund into something that I don't understand what it is, because I don't know there to be a program. First, can you tell me about this program and where I could read about it, where the program objectives are, how it will be evaluated, and tell me where else in the country there is a Stable Homes, Stable Schools initiative? Because this, I'm interested in housing, and this is a diversion of $9 million from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So I'm just wondering who else is doing this, where are the guidelines and objectives, and how would I go about learning more?
So let me start with who else is doing this. There are probably not any major cities that are engaging in a housing effort quite like this. The closest one I can think of is a property-specific effort that the Tacoma Housing Authority is working on, where they've engaged the school district with minimal support from the city in that case, but in a very defined way to advance both the opportunities of the students and require parents in exchange for housing support to be participatory in the school system. This particular program is based on a couple of principles. The first is that the goal would be 15 schools were selected in combination with discussions with the school system and the mayor's office. Those have the highest proportion of families at risk or homeless. And the notion is that if we could address that, we could stabilize those folks in the schools, the neighborhood schools that they're attending, and make sure that the kids have the opportunity to learn and advance. There's a range of opportunities proposed. We have foundation funding, I believe $500,000 from the Polad Foundation to do emergency or sort of maybe they need a month's rent or a security deposit or something to stay in place. That component is there. We'd be working with the social service people in the school system to identify the families. And the idea is to support, if needed, using a voucher-type subsidy, the families stay in a unit to continue the stability so that the kids are able to attend the school. The voucher part of this is very unique, and it is split between city and federal funds, 60% city funds, 40% federal funds. So that would get us to a voucher that we think would be able to find a unit in some of the areas where we would need to find them to keep the kids and families in those schools. The target over the 3 years is assistance of up to 300 families. We would hope that we would be able to roll the program out in conjunction with supportive services from others and begin to identify families and then lease them up. Our role really is to provide the federal subsidy, and in exchange for that, whatever the city decides would complement that. And this gets back to something we've talked about before, which is that the amount of money that comes to us for vouchers is fixed in ways that limit the number and type of vouchers we can have in play at any given moment. So the addition of city money, if that's the city's pleasure, would extend the federal subsidy quite a bit.
So we're taking over the responsibility of the federal government by putting money into rental assistance through vouchers.
Well,
so they've done a bad job, so our response is we should do a better job.
Well, one of the things this does is actually make it possible for us to fund and reach families we could not otherwise get to.
So I would just love to see the program guidelines, the schools that apparently have already been picked without any of our permission. I would like to see what the goals and objectives are, kind of what the outcomes are, how you're going to get them. I mean, I know nothing about this, and I know what the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is, and I know what we're doing to build and preserve affordable housing because it's an actual program that we're being asked to fund. But here it seems like we're being asked to fund an idea.
So I would say that perhaps you could just set up a meeting, or maybe the mayor could set up a meeting outside of the committee to talk about this too. I appreciate that Councilmember Goodman wants to have some of our budget debate going on right here, right now about this program of the mayor's. But if you do have a website or a link or a packet,
we can provide information that we have and that has the framing items that council member has asked for. And there is a service component as well.
Who's providing the services?
Yeah, we wanted the county to do that.
But has the county said they'd do that?
Yeah, we're in discussions with them. I would describe them as very early, and they've indicated that they would participate in that.
As much as they wanted to help with the homeless encampment too, I'm sure. So we kind of are talking to the county. I mean, I just kind of feel like I can't get enough information from anybody, and I'll just note for the chair, just not to be bratty, but the mayor doesn't just get to do programs on his own.
No, this
Without
is
the
something
city
we'll be
council.
approving as part of the budget or not approving, and we'll have a chance to debate it. I just don't want to take too much away from the resolution that Councilmember Warsame
Yes,
and
I'm
Jenkins
sorry,
have worked
which I
on.
very much support.
And we put on the agenda to discuss today by.
Well, one thing we can do is share the material we have.
Thank
so
you
that
very
you can
much.
see all that we're seeing and what that looks like. And we'd be glad to do that. If there's follow-up, we'd be glad to help with that as well. So
And if you send it to me, I'll make sure all committee members get it.
We
or
can-
you can
we can
send
do
it to
that.
the clerk, and that
That'd
would
be
be
fine.
excellent. I
Okay.
appreciate that.
Thank you. Anything else? All right. Thank you so much.
So are there any other questions or discussion or comments on the resolution and the staff direction? Councilmember Warsame.
Thank you, Chair Gordon and members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak at your committee. Thank you to our city staff for the work they've done on this resolution and for the continuing dialogue that they're having with Minneapolis Public Housing with regards to the MOU. The reason why, and also thanks to Council Vice President Jenkins for working on this with me and for her time and efforts. She couldn't be here, but I will speak on her behalf as well in order to thank everybody. The reason why we came up with this resolution and we're negotiating with the MOU is because of the importance that the Minneapolis Public Housing plays on many of our residents. And as somebody who has a large number of the high-rises concentrated in Ward 6, and somebody who has relatives that live in Minneapolis Public Housing, somebody who's familiar with Minneapolis Public Housing and their residents, I wanted to relay some of the concerns that the residents have, and that's why we came up with this resolution, and we're having the negotiations with the MOU. This is centered on the individuals, not the authority, not the city, but our residents, the people, the actual people that live in Minneapolis Public Housing, people who are members, senior citizens, immigrants, folks with disabilities, the most vulnerable members of our society who live and whose only real possession in life is the apartments that they have. And I wanted to relay their concerns and to give them certain protections. Yes, the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority is a separate entity to the city of Minneapolis. It was spun off, I think, a couple of decades ago. However, the people that live in MPHA, who reside there, are constituents of ours. They vote for us, they live in our city, and they deserve as much protection as possible. The reason why we are doing this is because there's a lot of concern. There's been a lot of information on social media. There has been campaigns going on, which has created a great deal of anxiety and fear with the people that live in the housing. And I wanted to reassure, and I've had a very good relationship with the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority leadership. We've had many discussions. We've been to many meetings with residents. But again, what comes back is the concerns and the anxiety of the residents. And they see the city as their protectors. They see the city council as champions of housing, including our esteemed chair of the Housing Committee. And they look to us for leadership. And that's why we came up with this resolution. And again, I'll thank the members of the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority who are here, our city staff leaders who are here who worked on this. And I wanted to reassure and have a document, and that's why the MOU is very important. I wanted to have a document that I can take back to the residents to show them the protections that are in place. Most of these protections are already there. With we've taken some of the information from the website of MPHA. These protections are federal level, but we wanted to make sure that they're articulated in a way that is very simple, very direct, and comes from the city council. So that's what we're working towards. And I'd like to thank everybody, and I'd like to thank the chair and the members of this committee for their support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I know that I have many constituents who are also grateful that the city is taking an interest in this and keeping an eye on things. We want to protect their interests through this process as well. Are there any other comments or questions? I think that I've already moved the action, so if not, though, I want to make sure that I'm moving to pass this resolution establishing the guidelines and also to direct staff to negotiate a memorandum of understanding with the MPHA. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries. Then we'll move on to our last item, and this is the Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing Appointments. The kind of thing that might have been on consent, but this is actually the first appointments to this new committee, and I thought people might be interested in hearing a little bit more about how many people applied and some of the process and who the folks are. So welcome.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Gordon and committee members. I'm Katie Topinka. I'm the Housing Policy Coordinator at CPED, and I am presenting the recommendations for the members of the new Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing. Just as a reminder, the Council approved a resolution establishing this committee in May. The Advisory Committee is charged with advising city leaders, including the Council, the Mayor's Office, and city departments on matters related to housing policy and development, rental licensing, and other areas that affect the accessibility, maintenance, and development of stable, quality, sustainable, healthy, and affordable housing in the city. A staff team of Kelly Rose Jones and Ron Harris from Regulatory Services, Lisa Smestad from the Health Department, me representing CPED, staff from the Mayor's Office, and then staff from the Chair and Vice Chair's offices, and staff from Councilmember Goodman's office as Chair of EDRS, reviewed all the applications we received and are bringing the recommendations forward. We received more than 100 applications for the 21 spots on the committee, which was great, but it made the task of reviewing and making selections pretty difficult. Unfortunately, there are many highly qualified applications that we were unable to bring forward for recommendation, but we reviewed all the applications and brought forward a list of recommendations, really trying to balance a wide range of life experiences and perspectives to have really thoughtful and productive conversations on the committee. The recommended committee members are made up of renters, homeowners, rental property owners, advocates for affordable housing. There are recommended members from 11 of the 13 wards in the city. And I would like to note there are at least a few of the people who are being recommended here today. We didn't tell folks they had to be there, but a few wanted to come and see this. There are 8 resident members appointed by the council, 4 members appointed by the mayor, and then also as part of this committee, there are recommendations for 9 representatives of organizations that work on housing. And just as a reminder, that's those organizations that were named were the Hennepin County Continuum of Care Operating Committee, Minneapolis Public Schools, Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, an organization that provides emergency or overnight shelter, and that organization will be represented by the Bridge, an organization that advocates for renters, and there's a member from Legal Aid, a nonprofit community development organization, and Project for Pride in Living will be representing that spot, an organization that advocates for rental property owners, and there's a board member from Multi-Housing Association, an organization that helps support homeownership and the elimination of racial disparities in homeownership rates. Build Wealth Minnesota will be representing that organization, and then an organization that works for equity in housing, and we have a member from the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability being recommended. So the committee will begin, we anticipate meeting in January, and we'll meet monthly, and we anticipate certainly we'll work with the members to figure out what works well for them. And it will continue to be staffed by the same city staff team that reviewed the application, so CPED, Regulatory Service, and the Health Department. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
I don't see any questions right here, but I'm wondering if anybody who is going to be appointed would like to come up and introduce themselves and maybe say where they're from and why they're interested, or come on up. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Brenda Marcos, and I'm representing Ward 5. Currently, I live in transitional housing at the Salvation Army, but my permanent resident is in Ward 9. I have been homeless numerous times on Lake Street. I want to advocate for people because I know affordable housing is very rough. Because I am employed. I'm a junior at Metropolitan State University, Human Services / Family Studies. I'm an intern at the Family Partnership in the PRIDE program. I want to make a difference for people because I've been there and I know how it feels not to have a place to sleep at night because you can't afford it. I also would like to say when I heard you talk one day at the Love East Lake Street committee that I'm on, you just drove a passion in me to step up and reach out to advocate for more than just the Lake Street corridor. And I really appreciate that passion you inspired in me.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for stepping up and joining this group. We can really use your perspective on the policy decisions that we're going to make. Is there anybody else here who would like to introduce themselves? All right. I know that Jeff is on there as well. You could, why not?
Well, I'll just say hello. I'm Jeff Horwich, the Director of Policy and External Affairs for the Housing Authority. And no, it's an honor, and we're looking forward to being a part of the committee. I think in settings like this, we often find that we take much more away than we're able to contribute, and I think this will be no exception to that. We're looking forward to it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I certainly appreciate everybody who applied, and the people that have stepped up and will be serving on this. We're going to have a lot of work for them, a lot of things for them to look at and help us figure out as we're grappling with housing issues in the city right now. And in my thinking, this is a really important piece of the infrastructure that we need to make sure we're making the best decisions as we try to move forward. So thank you so much. On that, seeing no other comments, then I will move the recommendation as presented for the appointments to our Minneapolis Advisory Committee on Housing. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries then. And that concludes our meeting for today. So we are adjourned. Not all our meetings, but